I'm a long-term colleague, friend of Mary Murphy's, and she has honoured me by asking me to MC at this book launch, which I'm delighted to do. So the first thing I have to do is do the formally bit, which is the emergency exits at the back, marked as emergency exits, and the toilet is through there and down the side to go out the door on the left-hand side and then turn left for the toilets. And could you please do what I forgot to do and turn off your mobile phones? So we can concentrate on what we're going to do. So we are here, very good, huge turnout. I'm looking for the camera. Where are do we have also people joining us online? Oh yes, there you are. There are also people joining us online, particularly to mention Professor Eva Leonovin, who is the president of Maynooth, and Dr. Niamh O'Reilly, who's on the university executive in Maynooth, who are joining us remotely, unable to make this launch. And we also have colleagues and friends joining us from Australia, Italy, France, Jersey, and Mary's relations in Drumcondra, who are here. I think the Drumcondra people are actually here rather than zooming in from beyond. So it's great to see you all. The formal part of the launch is going to last about 45 minutes or so. And after that, Mary has asked us to say that we'll be those who are still want to hear more and discuss more with people you haven't seen for so long over in the Duke, upstairs in the Duke, where I believe there will be some finger food. So I think those are the formal things they're the formal things I wrote down anyway. So hopefully they're the only formal things I have to say. It's a huge honor to introduce Mary for this book. I mean, I've worked with Mary for many years, and she's been dealing with, I think they're the two most important questions in the world, most serious questions, which is how do we distribute the wealth and the fruits of the earth fairly and justly and evenly? And the second question of how do we manage to sustain this planet so that we can all live here? And people like me have been caught in one of those strands of thinking, while in our private life or in our civic society life, sort of thinking and worrying about the other one. And I think there's a lot of people who have been in the other strand. And to bring the two most important questions together in something which not only creates a theoretical framework, which was what we would expect, but also begins to shape out a little bit of what we might do about it. But also, I think, really crucially, and it is the particular contribution that Mary makes, begin to flesh out how we might get those things to be done as citizens, human beings, activists, and so on. Is a wonderful achievement. And I'm delighted to be introducing Mary to to say a few words about the book and to present.
Hi, everybody. Hi. A serious, genuine welcome to everybody here. I'm really delighted. All the latecomers, there's seats up the front. Genuinely, there are. Anya, Maria, Liz, I know the backs are bad at your age. Come on up. And then come up. But it is absolutely really nice to see so many friends and family, colleagues that I've worked with over the years here, and a real sense of a good buzz in the room and a good catch up with people and a sense of a bit of a celebration. And that's what I really wanted this book launch to be about, was celebrating the work, because often book launches are quite dry and they're a bit boring and you kind of get through with them and they're quite academic, but the book isn't particularly academic, and I thought it was really important to share it with everybody because it is aimed at everybody. So in the spirit of that, I just wanted to start off by thanking people, because I'm known for forgetting at the end to do that. So in the book, there are a number of people thanked very genuinely for sharing early drafts of the book with me at a time when early drafts, in truth, shouldn't have been shared with anybody. They were pretty bad. And all the people, you know, engaged in the spirit in which it was intended and really gave me the kind of feedback that I hope they don't recognise the book now. And that would be a compliment to their feedback if they don't recognise the content that was in it. So they've acknowledged in the book, but I just wanted to name them now as from the civil society colleagues that I've worked with over the years: Siobhan O'Donoghue, Orla O'Connor, Niall Crowley, Mike Allen and Ruth Lawler, name spelled wrong. And from the academic world, Patrick Kirby, Pauline Cullen, Michael McGann, Matteo Mandelli and Fiona Duke, all of whom I have co-written with and have really contributed over the years to my thinking, and I hope mine to theirs. I really want to say thank you to Shane Goff, who's down the back there, not listening, but he was sterling. During the book, my mom died, and Shane really enabled me to, you know, do what I needed to do at home and kept the project rolling and really kept me rolling along the way. And without him, I genuinely couldn't have done the book. He's lots of other skills as well. Brilliant at proofreading, if anybody was looking for anybody. Really good academic, really good thinker, really, really good on detail, which I'm not always. So I really thank him most profusely, but most of all for the personal support that he gave me. And then there's the creatives. There's Damien O'Brien, who's in the room, who gave me the title, Nikki O'Brien, who helped me with graphic images, people in Policy Press, who did all the editing, the layout. There's Anne there who's videoing it, and of course the panel who's here today, Sinéad, Mercier and John Bissett and Mike. And thank you as well to the Lord Mayor for this venue, which I'm sure you'll appreciate is very nice. Just a personal anecdote, I was a Dublin City Councillor, many of you will know, from 2004 to 2008, and my father, who died in 2006, was always really frustrated with me because all the plaques on the wall are actually the coats of arms of Lord Mayors in the room, and mainly Lords, and even the few women mayors are called the Lord Mayor. And Dad was always really annoyed because, believe it or not, there's no Murphy. And he would be much happier with a Murphy on that than to see me standing here, I'll tell you. But it doesn't have to do him in some respects. So the book is very much, I'm just going to play one, just to give me a break. Sure. Nope. Sorry, there should be sound. Everyone needs to see these links. The political economy of 21st century capitalism over-focuses on growth, leading to social inequality, overconsumption and environmental degradation. The solution lies in progressing equality and environmental sustainability as interlinked goals. Achievement of each depends on the other. This requires institutional imagination. Ecosocial welfare can enable values and behaviours to evolve. For example, shifting from production and consumption towards other forms of participation, like care, for example. The book looks at the first steps towards ecosocial welfare: universal basic services and participation income. They need to be achieved in a short time frame, building on tools and ideas we have now. While globally relevant, the book anchors the discussion as an Irish case study. I hope this book appeals to people studying or working to improve local and global inequality and or working as climate activists. And it gives strategies and vocabulary to achieve the mobilisation and transitions needed to create social transformation. Find out more, and you can buy this book on ecosocial.ie. So why this book and why me? I hope the video gives you some insight immediately. And just to acknowledge two other creatives, Tati Kavanagh, who helped make the video, and Garrett Martin, who helped make well, who didn't help make, who made the website ecosocial.ie. And I think the video and the website give you some sense of why this book and why me, in that the book is not overly academic. It's accessible way beyond academia, and it is policy orientated, but it's more societal orientated. Its target is you, it's civil society, it's all of us. And the video and the website are part of my attempt to make sure that the book is larger than the book, and that it enables conversations to happen in lots of places, in community groups, in book clubs, in in the colleges, and the universities and the schools, so that there are a variety of ways of dipping into the conversation wherever anybody wants to be in it. I consider myself a pracademic. I kind of cross academic and civil society lines, and I cross disciplines. And I think that's important. And that interface of civil society and academia is really important in trying to create the kind of conversations that we need if we're to get our heads around together collectively what we need to do to tackle inequality and climate change in a way that will actually work for all of us. So the book is very much intended to be part of prompting and making and contributing to that conversation. And while Ireland is an anchor case study, so there's about a third of the book is about Ireland, the book is designed so that it can be used by any country and they can fill in the dots about their own country, and that conversation can be pan-European. And it's already been launched at a European level, and I've got good feedback about it. So the kind of the structure that the book is in is very much captured by this web that Nicky O'Brien designed. And the idea of the web came from the Women in Green and Common, where I would have been really inspired myself to see how activism can change the world. Quite literally, the Women in Green and Common got rid of nuclear missiles from Berkshire in England. Through their own activism, they transformed the world for everybody. So the book is inspired by their symbol of a web. And the web symbolizes joining the dots. It symbolizes working in a systemic way and across different systems. So the yellow symbolizes the political economy, looking at the superstructure that we live in and that causes the kind of inequality and environmental degradation that we're talking about. The blue is about social policy. It's about some of the steps that we can take to put in place a new way of delivering what people need to feel secure in a world that is fast changing. And the red, yellow, pink is about the politics of how we might achieve that transformation. So it brings together three disciplines: political economy, social policy, and political sociology, in I hope, in a way that makes sense to each other and makes sense to the reader. And I'm going to just not bore you with science now, but you don't need to read that. These are some of the concepts underlying the book, which actually are really important to me as an academic, because they speak very much to my own values. And I would hope that they would help people talk about values more and situate the conversations we need to have in a conversation about the values we have. I believe they're values largely shared by most of humanity, and that if we could talk about what we want in life a little bit more plainly and easily with each other, we could find the politics of getting there a little bit easier. So Karl Polanyi, I'm a big fan of his, as is Pader, who's in the room, and he makes the argument that there is a co-joined problem of social inequality and ecological destruction. And it's really due to the nature of the market economy that we have. It makes a market society. We simply achieve too much of what we need to achieve in life through the market. And it really restricts how we can live our lives and how we can mind our planet. So the solution lies in a co-joined decommodification, taking things out of the market and striking a new balance between state and society and the market, a balance that better protects society and that's better for our environment. The book is very hopeful, and I would see hope as a discipline and as a political position. I wouldn't say to people I'm an optimist. I would say to people, hope derives from working to try and make something happen. So the book is hopeful. It's part of the action of trying to make something happen. And a lot of people are trying to do that in different ways, using their imagination and art and culture and storytelling and activism. And I want the book to be seen as part of that. So I've said already that freedom from the market is a core concept in the book, because I believe that if we free ourselves from the market and look for more societal and state-led solutions to things, we can better meet our collective needs. So values like reciprocity, an ethic of care for both humanity and nature are really important. And in terms of how we need to do this, because it can sound too big and overwhelming, I think the trick is to point in the direction you need to go in, get a good compass bearing on what you want for the future, but then identify in very practical terms some of the smaller steps that you can take in policy terms to begin on that journey. We don't really know where that journey will take us, and we shouldn't get too caught up with blueprints that design it out. But knowing what the first steps are and being able to take them quickly is part of the solution. Mary Robinson, our former president, said climate change is a man-made problem that requires a feminist solution. I'm totally with her on that. I believe it care-centric solution is essential when we're talking about this. And I really do think that when we're talking about the politics of transformation, we are talking about new power relations. We're talking about shifts in power. And there has been a shift in power to global elites, to industry, to fossil fuels. That power has to be shifted back through a combination of societal mobilization and through better democratic institutions. And the two of them need to work together. And the last thing I think in terms of a value is, you know, it's important to have fun. It's important to take risks. It's important to tell stories. It's important to use our imagination. It's important, I think, really, and I really felt this when I was writing the book, to avoid the narcissism of small differences, to be able to say sometimes, I got that wrong, or I used to think that, but I've thought about it more and now I think that, because it's the only way we can take risks with each other and having those conversations and building those coalitions. So to me, that's a value, to really enable each other to have those conversations and take those risks. So I just wanted to take you a little bit through what's in the book, just in three parts. I'll only take a couple of minutes, but the first three chapters are about what I said, from commodification, over-relying on the market to meet our needs, to decommodification, finding other ways than the market of meeting our needs. Chapter 2 looks at how the overdependence on the market, on the form of political economy or capitalism that we have, really does lead to environmental outcomes that are negative, and why we need a post-growth kind of state. And chapter 3 looks in the same way at the same problem, which is commodification and the kind of capitalism we have, and how it creates an unequal society, particularly in the global south, but also in the global north, and how inequality is so crucial to tackling climate change. Unless we tackle serious excessive wealth, we won't be able to get at some of the overconsumption and the over kind of utilization of resources that we see happening. And on the other hand, if we tackle climate change in a way that's not democratic and not equalizing, we could easily create a more unequal world, and that won't be sustainable from a societal perspective. So they very much go together. So the three chapters together talk about what we need to do to push the compass in a different direction. And it looks at welfare as we know it now. And it sort of makes an assessment that it's too orientated at welfare and work. And it needs a much wider breadth of welfare to achieve well-being and sustainability. So it reimagines what that welfare might be like as an eco-social welfare state, or as Emer, my daughter, coined it, a chico-social welfare state, which the book does engage with. But one that can really meet our collective needs and allow us to flourish in a way that our present one doesn't. And that can be translated into a very expansive type of just transition, rather than a very narrow one that we hear about now. So when we look at the Irish bits in those chapters, you know, really it's about unpacking how the Irish political economy looks and is, how it's very commodified, it's very market dependent, and it means Ireland's record on both the environment and social inequality isn't what it could be given the level of resources that we have. Now, I put this up to scare you to death, okay? The point is that eco-social policy can be really, really expansive. It's a wonderful palette of different types of things that can be done to make the world better. And I am only choosing to talk about two particular policies out of a whole range of them, because I'm focusing on eco-social policies that are foundational and that are about the welfare state. But we could look at, for example, just picking out debt cancellation for the global south, living wages, maximum individual carbon budgets, ending food waste. It talks to a lot of what many people in this room work with and believe in, but it's taken a particular angle on it where I want to delve in more depth into just two of them. So basically eco-social policy, because people will ask you, you'll say I was at this launch about this weird book, and they'll say, what's that? And you'll say, it's eco-social policy is a way of tackling inequality and climate change at the same time through the same tools, in a very basic definition of what it is. So that's just to reassure you that there's a lot more than what I'm going to talk about, because the middle of the book, the blue bit of the book, talks about three fundamental aspects that I think are needed in an eco-social welfare state. One is enabling institutions, and by that I'm talking about education, labour market institutions, career guidance, public employment services. institutions that really enable us to live out the full value of the lives we want to live, instead of ones that seem to narrow us down into particular smaller routes in life that we may not particularly want. So institutions that enable us to be reciprocal actors, to realize our interdependence with each other. And I think what I take great hope from myself is that I see in our everyday lives that we are very reciprocal with each other. We really do care for and help each other, but sometimes our policies get in the way of enabling us to do that. So this is about trying to reorientate the policies to work together. The second part of this, Chapter 5, looks at universal basic services. And this is an argument that whatever way we reconfigure the welfare state, services have to be at the heart of it rather than cash payments or income support, because services allow things to be met collectively. They mean we don't have to individually purchase things to get what we need. We can share collective public basic services. And there are lots of ways of delivering those services, some okay through the state, but lots of other ways through public-private, through society, through new forms of cooperative social licensing. So that's how we can use our imagination to see how we can make services be available in ways that meet our needs. But the state will always play a very fundamental and central role, I believe, in enabling that to happen. The state will have to regulate that space. The state will largely have to fund it. It will have to plan. It will have to monitor. So the state has a very central role in that future, but it doesn't necessarily have to deliver the services. And the last one is participation income. So that's thinking about a form of income support that's not like our means tested payments at the moment, but is a form of income support that complements universal basic services and socially values a lot of the work we do. So a lot of people who are dependent on social welfare, they do a lot of socially useful work, particularly care work, but also democratic work, ecological work, community work. And it's about letting them do that. It's about valuing that and saying, we will reward and recognize and socially value your contribution. So these three, the blue bit is about sort of mapping out those basic parts of what an eco-social welfare might look like. And the last section, the reddish pinkish ones, talk about how do you make that kind of change happen? It's big, maybe it's pie in the sky, some people might say, maybe it's not realistic, but I believe it has to be realistic because we are facing into the fundamental challenges, existential challenges of climate change and inequality, and they are linked. So we have to find ways of, as I've said, reshifting the power balance, mobilizing power in new ways so that we can think about how we can utilize what society really wants to happen into the future. I think a large part of that is covered in chapter 8, which is talking about we need imagination and we need ideas, and we need to find a language that enables us to have imagination and ideas. So a lot of the time, I think our language narrows down what we think is possible. And really the chapter tries to look at how you need to frame what we talk about things as positively and as constructively as we can, so that you can bring people with you on a journey, so that people don't have to articulate what they're against. They can begin to articulate and value and act for what they want and what they are for. I think that's really important. And for that reason, the book tries to be creative. It tries to engage in storytelling. It brings in personal anecdotes and examples, and it tries to sort of be what it says needs to happen in some respects. The last chapter here talks about a concept called high energy democracy, which comes from Brazil. And this is the idea that acknowledging that the structural power of capital, of fossil fuel industries, and of elite is very, very strong. So what kind of power could be imagined from below and from the middle that could really match that type of power? And this is where I think taking that structural power very seriously, and it clearly is very powerful, but also taking the power of democracy very seriously and taking the power of society very seriously, and really believing that a lot of the change that got generated, big transformational change, like apartheid ending, like women getting the vote, that came from below. It came from society building up demand. And I think that's what needs to happen in this case as well. So it's an argument for agency. It's an argument for changes in democracy that enable and work with society much better. And it's an argument for coalition building and for joining the dots across, particularly the kind of movements that are for environmental sustainability, that are against inequality and poverty, and making those conversations happen across those people a little more. So I said we wouldn't be too long. So we can conclude with the book then. So, I mean, really, the book is about trying to state what the urgent problems are, but also pointing out that there are solutions and that those solutions are everybody's business. They're all of our business. And it's a kind of call to action in that respect, in terms of asking people to take on that challenge. It argues really clearly that eco-social welfare addresses both inequality and ecological sustainability, and it does that by rebalancing between the state, society, the market and the environment. It calls for strategy, for contesting power through democracy, for joining the dots together, for getting over our small differences and working as a more cohesive whole. And the last thing I just say by way of conclusion is that there's a slogan that we all used to use a lot, saying, no, there's opportunity in crisis. And I think by now we've been through a few crises together and we haven't really seen the types of opportunities that we've seen emerge. And some work that I was doing for on the pandemic really convinced me of this, that what the pandemic did in terms of providing opportunities, it accelerated some of the changes that were already in motion, like remote working or home-based teaching and things like that. So I think we need to be ready now. If we want the crises that are coming, if we want to be able to take opportunity of some of the politics that might emerge, we have to be ready now. We have to stop thinking and that, you know, that we'll figure this out in the future. The future is here, the future is now, and we need to be ready now in that respect. So I leave it at that for now.
So if I could detain you a bit further from, I know you're going to rush off and read the book now after that. You have to keep your attention on this event and you can read it later. We have two speakers who are going to formally launch the book for us, very aptly chosen people to talk about its contents and its themes. And the first of them is John Bissett. John will be known to very many people. He is a community worker, an activist, and a writer. He has been a community worker for only 35 years, which means, I'm looking around, he's probably just a beginner compared to some of the audience here. Been active in a whole range of different campaigns which have been central to public discourse and public policy in Ireland, politics in Ireland, on housing, anti-austerity, public debt, and an activist over that period of time. And he is now the author of a really important book himself, Regeneration, Public Good or Private Profit, which is a really important contribution to an important debate. So ask John Bissett to come and say a few words.
Oh God, I hope I don't mess up the tech. Thanks very much for the invitation. I broke my very expensive pennies glasses earlier, so I've gone back to an old pair that has no tension. So I hope they don't fall off. So it's really good to be here. I don't know, Mike, you'll just give me a shout when I've gone on too long or if whatever. So I want to start by congratulating Mary on writing a really brilliant and very important book that we badly need in our various places and positions in Irish activism and political life in the deepest and broadest possible sense. I have some understanding of the blood, sweat and tears that you put into getting the book together, from trying to get one published with Bristol as well, who I think have been brilliant in terms of kind of a radical publishing house. And it's a real problem that we don't seem to have a radical publishing house in Ireland. So fair play to Bristol. So anyway, I think for me, the book explores the question. I wrote a book recently called It's Not Where You Live, It's How You Live. And I think the book explores the question about how we live in the world now, why it is the way it is now. Eco-capitalism, our Taoiseach, he is the Taoiseach now, he recently called himself an eco-capitalist. So the leader of the state expressly professes that view. I think Mary is asking how the world could be better, perhaps even much better, if we can build an eco-social welfare state. So to me, she's asking deep ontological and normative and very practical questions as well. So when I was thinking about the book, I thought we could ask it in this way: is it possible to have a re-enchantment of the world? How will we and how can we reorganize our societies and ourselves So when we ask questions about alternatives, as we often do, Mary's offering one here. I'm in. I hope we can still get some good chocolate when the changeover comes, but I'm definitely in. So it's clear from the book that Mary's been involved on the streets and in many, many campaigns in many spheres and aspects of life, as well as in the lecture hall. And that mix comes through really well in the book. The word pracademic is new to me, but I think there are others that also fit Mary, like scholar activist, or Gramsci's term, organic intellectual. So this theory, experience, praxis combination is evident in the book and adds hugely to it in my view. The book is rich in content and challenges to build bridges, particularly between red and green politics. For whatever reason, it seems very difficult to cross-reference class and environmental politics. Perhaps it takes enormous amounts of energy to do one of these things on its own. Or perhaps there's a mutual lack of understanding or interest or trust. Sometimes in working class communities, green politics are hard to keep in touch with or engage with. It's more about where the next meal is coming from. So Mary has a couple of phrases in the book. So it's not the end of the world or the end of capitalism, but the end of the week that matters, because the end of the week could be the end of the world relatively. It depends on how much money you owe to people sometimes. But I think try we must is the message for this new vision. So the book tries to fuse these epistemologies, these knowledges from these different fields that Mary talked about there. And I think one of the rich things that I found about the book is that there are many useful references that connect these different fields. So I met Sinéad recently, and I'm just beginning to get to understand and to know a little bit about the work that yourself and people like Paddy Bresnan and others are doing. And I heard you speak at a RIFT meeting recently about that. So hopefully we can do more of that cross-fertilization. So the book asks this question about how such a cross-referencing of class politics and green politics and gender politics can be institutionalized in our welfare system and policy mechanisms. I was wondering about how it would feel through all of our institutions, in fact, right? So if we have an eco-social welfare state, what would an eco-socialist education system look like? What would an eco-socialist field of community and youth work and addiction look like? So we will perhaps need a few instructions for certain people to retrain, or perhaps even to clear their desks might be in order. So we know that all of the policy decisions have huge impact when they come to the ground. So why not policy decisions which help people with their needs? So the way I read it, Mary is asking and prodding us to think about bringing into being an eco-social welfare state which has deep roots in stopping climate change and which also has a fundamental commitment to transforming the fundamental class antagonism which is at the heart of capitalist economic systems. In theory, such an eco-social welfare state will negate capitalism as we know it. As I understand it, it will make it unrecognizable or relegate markets to merely functional operations in terms of they will be use values for us instead of exchange values. So we will still have an economy and money, but it will be embedded in the society and not the other way around as it is now, where the tail of capitalism, as it were, wags the dog of society. One of the questions I have is, will we still have classes engaged in necessary relations in an eco-socialist state? Or can an eco-social state bring an end to classes as we know them? And I know it's up to all of us to make that happen. And as I was reading the book, the question in my mind was, is this a process of becoming that we will make in dialectical fashion as we go forward? So you quote Freire about we make the road as we walk, and I think it's Otto Neurath who also said we need to keep fishing while we mend the boat. So they're similar phrases. So the book teases out many difficult questions on many difficult issues. And this kind of at the core of it for me is this relationship between climate, economy, state, and society. How are we to transition from the world of the commodity to a decommodified world? The world of the commodity is destroying the planet. If markets and money disembedded themselves, as Mary talks about the double movement from Polanyi, from society and state, they need to be re-embedded and made work for the good of us all and for the good of the planet, and not for the good and the riches and the wealth, extraordinary levels of wealth of small groups of people. So, but as we discovered, many of us in this room, from, especially during the austerity years, there was a phrase which said, demand from Moody's rules the world. I don't know if many people remember that. Moody's are a debt rating agency. So as we all discovered, the debt rating agency told the Irish government what it could and couldn't do at that time. So how do we shift the world on its axis from the manufacturing of desire to the meeting of basic needs? How do we think beyond the current devastating global capitalist system and develop these alternatives? And I think the book is really interesting in that respect. So the iceberg drawing on page 16 has many similarities with theory that I'm interested in, is known as critical realism, in that what we see and what happens and the events are just part of the story. So what Mary to me is saying is it's the invisible churn that's going on beneath the surface that's often the thing which is shaping, creating and constituting the societies and the objects, you know, that we become or that we live in. One of the places that I think is particularly relevant in terms of recently is public housing estates. How are they constituted? And they're constituted by this amalgamation of different forces. So policy are one of the most important mechanisms that constitute these objects. Hegel said the concrete is the unity of diverse determinations. So lots of things push together and they create this particular thing. Let me have a drink of water. So the work of developing practical policy decisions around having enough resources to live on and also ways of contributing to the societies we live in. So we desperately need our theorists and thinkers, but we also need people who are going to quietly write the revolutionary policies that will provide us the instructions for this new machine. I don't know where they are the outside. But I think you're one of them, obviously, Barry, in terms of the people who just sit there and do that really important work, right? When I was reading the book, I thought, could we design a game called Ecosocial, which comes with kit and instructions, and you know, Christmas time we can all get into it, and then we go afterwards and go, yeah, let's make it happen. Like all of the policy sections of the book, like I thought the participatory income section of the universal basic services is really important in terms of how that would, you know, I think it's great. I wonder how it would work in practice, but I thought that's really interesting in terms of how we go forward. So like obviously in the stuff that I've been doing recently, the key issues for people were the wage, right? Your wage, in terms of that was how you were going to survive or live. Debt was a key part of people's lives. I had to borrow. I need to borrow money. Who can I get money from? And so on. So those things are critical. There's so many things about the book you can talk about. I think the points, maybe we can come back to them, about language at the end of the book and about campaigns and about why we would not use this sort of language and use this sort of language is really interesting. Just a thought on the currently existing, the really existing Irish state, right? We've had this chat about optimism and pessimism on the phone yesterday. So the book places a lot of emphasis on what I would call a strong egalitarian state, what other people would call strong democracy. But there is a gap or disagreement. There's a philosopher I read called Mercier, and he would say that there's a tension or a problem or an antagonism within our current state. Which brings about what sort of a state do we want to live in, which is what the book is all about. So for me, the experience of recent years has, as to how things pan out at a ground level, has been one of constant attacks, constant assault, for example, on the field of community and youth work by state agencies and state actors. It's hard to explain that to people. People maybe don't get it and they go, well, it happened to us as well, so just get on with it, will you, or whatever. But the nature of our state and how it operates and practices on a daily basis, I have found astonishing, right? And it continues, it's kind of, I don't know, I'll come back to it in terms of its vindictiveness, let's say, right? There's the vindictiveness that has been displayed towards organizations at that level would make you worry about the capacity. How are we going to take that out of that system and retrain people? And I think that's really important. Just to finish, I think on the social and political imaginary, I wrote a book recently about life and conditions in the Dublin working class estate. And one of the things that I would have found that despite the scarcity and the lack that people faced every day, there was a very strong core of solidarity in very harsh conditions, right? That has taken a battering from many quarters, but it's still very strong. We often don't see these things because we don't have the time, or we don't take the time, or we actually don't believe that it's possible that people living in such precarious situations and precarious lives would care for each other, would go out of the way for each other, would give each other money, would give each other support, would look after the people who need support and so on. But it happens, and it's real. So that thing is there. I think that actual, you know, the kind of, if there's like an outer skin of something, this core is in there in the middle, but it's been buried so deeply and battered so deeply in recent years that we've kind of lost sight of it. So these practices of imagination and social imaginary that Mary talks about, I think they're there. They need to be nurtured, resuscitated, and given oxygen again. If the infrastructure doesn't exist, our capacities and tendencies and potentials remain unexercised or unrealized. We must believe in people. So once again, congratulations, Mary. Brilliant job.
Thank you, John. And well, John has, I think, started as a community activist and has really entered into, with enthusiasm and great control, into the academic discourse and so on. I think our next speaker, Sinéad Mercier, perhaps comes from a different trajectory, at least as far as I know. She's a lecturer in environmental law and planning at UCD, and her research themes are around environment, around cultural heritage, climate change, that whole set of eco part of eco-social. But she's very much engaged in trying to discuss those issues and talk about those issues in a way which engages with an activist community, thoughtful community, and social change through writing, relevant writing, through Irish media and podcasts. So delighted to ask Sinéad Mercier to add her voice to the welcome of the book.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I'm really delighted to be here today to introduce Mary's book. I can't really explain or convey to you how important it is that a book like this has been published. I first came across Mary's work when she wrote, I know obviously that she's been working for a long time, but when she worked with Rory Heron on child homelessness in Ireland and the current high levels, but also the sort of institutional arrangements that were being planned by the state to deal with the issue. And I subsequently met Mary again in Maynooth when I was working there as a lecturer. And at the launch of Ian Gough's own book, Heat, Need and Human Greed, a fantastic book which finally, I suppose, really kind of broke ground in Ireland and in speeches by the president at the time, in this tying the social sciences very strongly to environmentalism. And something I've noticed in my own work and in my own kind of activism and work in the area is that despite the hard work of people, particularly Pader Carney is here, and many others, Tim Jackson, Maria Mees, who passed away today, and Michael Cronin and others, to kind of root environmental traditions in social justice and kind of and justice in general, there is unfortunately a strong trend of a Malthusian element. Often you will kind of hear, and this is something that we have to admit as environmentalists, I think in Ireland, often environmental policies will be used to batter poor people. And that is something that I've noticed quite strongly sometimes in Ireland, that perhaps we have long needed a book like this to finally say that no, that the future that is planned, that we can reach 1.5 degrees, we can keep below that level in a way that is consistent with human flourishing, in a way that is consistent with kindness and with those maxims that are used often, that we used again and again during the pandemic, of ní narca cur le chéile, scacha chéile a war na níne. Languages and phrases that are used so often that, as John says, what is their meaning anymore? But there is this strong core, there is this core of goodness and kindness that can be brought to light. And what the importance of kind of Ian Gough's book, and now at last we have our own in Mary, surpassing it even here at the national level, managing to combine social welfare and environmental issues, breaking at last this sort of nature-culture divide. And that nature-culture divide has actually been broken, I suppose, in a way in Ireland and internationally, in that the culture of human society has interacted and brought in environmentalism, but through the cultural kind of prism or ideas of a very small elite, mainly through a market perspective. And this is something that comes to light the more that we grapple with this consistent issue of a proliferation of emissions. We're hearing that the next few years will be the highest of emissions and heat ever, and yet a proliferation of environmental policy and legal policy to match it, and yet the emissions are not going down. And I suppose that may be a result of the fact that we are implementing a lot of this legislation and climate policy which comes from a time of the fall of the Berlin Wall, of a time of a no alternative but a market, a time that we are told that the best way to deal with emissions was actually to, in fact, to remove democracy from the situation, to replace it with a market devised by technocrats in a technocratic manner, that it is a market that can solve our current crisis. But this most necessary piece of work that we have here tells us perhaps what we have long understood, that many of the ways that we need to deal with the climate crisis are already there and rooted in our current traditions, something which Peadar and Michael Cronin in his new book, Irish and Gaeilge agus an Ecological, have spoken about. Also the work of Angela Burke and many others, many other people who have talked about this cultural reciprocity that is encased in the Irish language as one example, and the day-to-day practices of organic intellectuals like Mary and John themselves, but also on our streets as well. And something I wonder is if perhaps that if we had a book like this, if we had had understandings like this at the time, perhaps the water charges and the large debates around the carbon tax, we would have seen them not for what they were kind of depicted as, which was anti-environment or kind of populist anti-climate measures, but actually an Irish re-envisioning of perhaps what water should be. Water is a human right. Water is something that should be decommodified. Carbon or carbon emissions as something that is wholly immoral to commodify and treat as something to be traded as an emission in a scheme. Or even the concept of natural capital, the fact that you can value a whale as 50 million euro in an international economy, and rather than something that it is a meal to more or something in a completely different mindset. And that language and those understandings exist and are strong, and there's a rich reservoir of it in our culture. If we had known if we had a book like this that we could turn to in the policy sector at that time of those marches, perhaps we would have understood that how environmentalism is conceived of in the Irish experience, and perhaps all over the world as well, is not as an environment that environs us, something that's out there to be taken from, to be extracted from for human or a minority of human needs, but in fact a co-heal, something that is a lived-in life, something that is more closer to what James Moore talks about, which is oikos in Greek, and many other cultures as well across the world, where the human and the culture are interconnected and fitche fuche lena chéile. And I want to kind of mention that many of the struggles that we are dealing with, as John mentioned there, in terms of the fight from the state or the kind of the pressure from the state. I was in this room only a few weeks ago with An Taisce talking about new cultural heritage legislation. And it was mentioned there that there's been a huge upswing in SLAP lawsuits, so lawsuits attacking particular human rights defenders in environmental circumstances. Similarly, which I notice are also being used against housing organisations like Catún and also journalists as well. And we also see kind of a a rise in legislation being used to specifically target certain environmental human rights defenders. Similarly, has been happened, cutting of funding as well is a very similar kind of activity. And also as well, this kind of idea that I suppose technocrats might know best, that they know best how to end poverty, not the ordinary person in the street that experiences it. I have never been more inspired or more heartened than the ordinary people I meet who within a couple of months will know everything about the fracking industry and all its kind of links internationally. So what I want to say is that, again, I am delighted to have this book, delighted as well that we have something here in book form that we can point to as a pathway towards implementing that culture of reciprocity rather than a market framework that takes. So, Gramina Mahagi Achorja, the re-enchantment, the word. Oh, also, sorry, very quickly, just to mention as well the importance of language and the re-enchantment of the world as well. I really enjoyed the link with the Dublin is Dying movement, and would agree with you that it's certainly kind of a morning star or an evening star way to look at how we can understand that culture, song, and music is a reservoir of this understanding as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Sinead. I think we can consider the book fairly well launched to the world. I do think one of the dimensions which Mary drew attention to, which I think is important, is that it is a book, but it's also the website, and it's also very much a sort of a tool for activism and for thinking, for engagement. I think that's a really important dimension of what Mary has achieved here. So to finish us off this evening, Mary is going to say a few additional words. So to you, Mary.
I know what my father would say now, if he saw this with all the wood, him being a fireman and all that. Sinead finished there on the importance of song and culture, and what I wanted to do next isn't really got to do with the book at all, but I wanted to just take a moment collectively to mention the death of a friend who very much knew the value of what Sinead was talking about, the value of activism, the value of connecting the dots across a lot of different equality issues, but also loved nature, loved just the crack, loved singing, loved people, was very grounded in a sense of place in his own life, even though he lived all over Ireland and ended up living in Brussels. But Fintan Farrell, a friend of very many people in the room, died just before Christmas of last year. And indeed, a lot of us, I mentioned earlier on, my own mother died. I know a lot of people were of an age where we've experienced a lot of loss over the last number of years. So I just wanted to take a moment to light a candle and give people a moment to just think about the love and the care that the book is trying to resurrect and to talk about and to value, and to bring it into that. But I also wanted to finish with a song. And when I was trying to think of what song to finish with, very much in the keeping of what Sinead just said and what John was saying about the enchantment, is that there's a song that Ewan MacColl wrote in 1986, and he wrote it when he was halfway up a mountain and he was 72 years of age, and he realised, I'm not going to get to the top, darn. And he just sat down, he let his wife and kids go on up, and he waited for them, and he came back down with them. And a few weeks later, he wrote a song called The Joy of Living. And it was a beautiful, reflective song about everything that he loved about living: nature, love, care, relationships, the pure joy of living. And he mentions in the song his wife and his partners, but also just his love of biodiversity, of nature, of the mountains, of the birds, the seas. And really bizarrely, more anecdotes, but Fintan was a gas man for a funeral himself. He loved, for some bizarre reason, he was hooked from a very young age. Even in his 30s, he was kind of always, what kind of funeral would you have? And I kind of got in with him on it, and I found that song and I thought, do you know what? I'd love that song played at my funeral. So I went one further and I said, you know what, Fintan, I'd love you to play that song at my funeral. So pre-Google, got the words of the song, Fintan learned it off. And I thought, you know what, I would love to play that song here today in honor of Fintan. But somebody, Paul Gannell in the APN said, I can go one more. I can get you the words of Fintan playing that song. And that's what I want to finish with now. So it's a song, you know, it echoes the sentiments of Fintan's life, but also the sentiments of, I think, most people in the room, and the sentiments of people we've lost who we love and care for. And it also echoes very clearly the politics of the book and the underlying values that the book is trying to do it. So in typical fashion, Fintan gets the last word. Yeah. Shane, right?
Can the cold up with those frozen seas? The snow and the wind and the rain on hills and mountains. Days in the sun and the earth like wine, and we drink and drink. And we drink till we're drunk on the joy of living. My kids, soon you must lie alone.
Good.
Flesh of my flesh, my future life, bone of my bone. May your wings be strong, may your days be long, safe be your journey. Each of it bears inside of you the gift of love. May it bring you life and warmth and the pleasure of living. Eagerly savor each new day and the taste of its out. Never lose sight of the truth and the joy of living. Farewell to you, my love, soon you must lie alone. Lie in my arms once more until darkness comes. You fill up my days, held the night day, dearest companion. Years pass by and are gone with the speed of birds in flight. Our life like the verse of a song there in the mountains. Give me your hand and love and join your voice with mine, and we'll sing of the hurt and the pain and the joy of living. Lead me to some high place of better rock and limb. Scatter my dust and ashes, speak me to the wind. So that I might be part of all you see, here you are breathing. I'll be part of the chorus cry in the soaring hawk, the blue milkworm and the sun to hung with diamonds. I'll be riding the gentle breeze that blows through your hair, reminding us how we shared in the joy of living.
I can see a few tears in the room, including my own, so I'm not going to say much except to say a really genuine thank you to all of you for sharing the launch of the book with me. You can tell by me, the book means a lot to me, and I have ambitions for us collectively in what we can do with books like that. And as Sinead and John said, in working as activists in communities, in organisations, wherever we are, and I'm trying to do that. So big thank you to Sinead and John, and of course to Mike. Again, thank you to Shane. You can see how dependent I am on Shane. I'm going to have a withdrawal program from him now that the book is finished. But again, sincere thanks to everybody. It was a collective endeavour. You saw the list of names associated with it. And I really want to thank you all for sharing it and for coming along today. So enjoy the evening.